Hello and welcome everyone to the third season of TesterSpeak. Yes, it's been quite a long journey of 2 years, and we enter our third season. Well, we have been going on with the mission of bringing to you the journeys of all the testers from around the world, and each one of them, believe me, has a unique story to tell. So, in the quest for new journeys and new experiences, let's get on with the third season of TesterSpeak. And I am privileged to begin the third season with an absolutely fantastic person who has been on the forefront of testing and in community work lately. It gives me a lot of pleasure in welcoming Lewis Prescott as my next guest. Hey, Lewis, how are you?
Hello, hello. Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. And like I said, I mean, you've been around for some time now and have been very active. I have heard your podcasts and you've been doing some great work, a lot of collab work with other testers, which is always interesting to see. And, the other testers also speak very highly of you. So I thought, okay, so here is somebody who is coming as my next guest. and what good fortune! You're the first guest of season 3. So welcome to TesterSpeak.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, I think we were reaching out to each other at a very similar time. It aligns very nicely, and it's a pleasure to be the first guest on the new season.
Yes. So I have interviewed close to 70 testers so far, and each one of them from different parts of the world has their unique journey. They've had stories to tell, they have had experiences to share, and they've all been very encouraging and very forthcoming in their views. They've always encouraged other testers, had some motivational things to talk about, and I'm sure you've got plenty as well. So let's get started. So my first question for you is, how did you get into testing, or just like everybody else, testing happened to you?
Yeah, testing happened to me, absolutely. So I went to university. I did a psychology degree, which is obviously nothing related to software testing, but I actually use psychology a lot in my day-to-day work. Then I worked for a software company who did personality profiling. So that's what I wanted to do with my psychology degree, is understand people more and apply that to the business context. And they obviously had the software that went along with that. And I worked out, I was one of like 5 or 6 people that worked at this company. So I did everything. My primary role was to answer the phones and be on support. But I got involved in marketing, I got involved in testing, I got involved in a lot of the business operations. So yeah, I worked out that the software side of things and the testing part was very cool, but I didn't know it was testing at the time. I just was playing around with the application and working out whether it was working as expected. So then I used those skills to get onto a graduate scheme, and that's how I got into testing. But yeah, I stumbled upon it, and here we are today.
Fantastic. I think after trying out so many things, you chose probably the world's best profession.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, I have stuck on to testing for more than a couple of decades, and I just love it. So I'm sure there's plenty for you to, take away and learn every day.
Definitely.
Okay, so you did mention about psychology and testing, and I see a very close relationship. But I want to know your experience. How have you been able to use psychology as if I may use the word, a tool in your testing journey?
Yeah, so I think the psychology aspect aligns very closely to working in agile and working in agile teams, because the team dynamic is the most important part, and getting work done is not necessarily about the problems you're solving or the way that you're going about building software. It's about how you're delivering that software and the people that interact with that. And that's where the kind of psychology aspects come in. For example, like biases between teams. Working in agile teams, you're often working on your own thing, and you form judgments and insights into other teams without knowing about the other teams. And so these kind of biases you can pinpoint as a psychologist and work out, okay, that's because of this concept, and how do we approach that? Also, working as a tester, you are often that person which is the last line of call. You're the person who has to make hard decisions. And so understanding other people and understanding how the dynamic of how you approach things impacts others. Again, that's how I think my understanding of psychology and understanding of social interactions helps in my day-to-day.
That's a brilliant perspective, and I like the fact that you especially talk about biases. And
Mm-hmm.
I keep talking about biases from time to time because I come across a lot. And one of the biggest ones for me is inattentional blindness, where you don't see the obvious. You're looking for stuff, but you and you have got so many things cluttered up in your mind that you miss the obvious. It is right
100%.
there in front of you. And as testers, we have a tendency of doing that because when there is a information overload,
Yeah.
you so from the biases perspective, I mean, this was just my personal opinion. Which bias can you see is more prevalent in, let's say, an agile team?
Yeah, the agile team, I think the most prevalent bias is that outsider insider dynamic, where you're very encapsulated in your team, and so you
Yeah.
see everyone else as the enemy. And then if you can't do everything, if you're not autonomous, you're not a cross-functional team, and you can't execute everything independently, then you form lots of dysfunctional biases against those outsiders that live outside of your team. So I think that for me is the most prevalent, and that causes the most friction when you're looking at software delivery, in my perspective.
Absolutely. I think that's a very interesting one. And you've used a very interesting word in your previous response, and I want to talk a little bit about that. You spoke
Mhm.
about autonomy. Now, we've come of an age where, there was a lot of focus on independent testing teams, and the testing teams will be responsible for a certain task, and they will give their independent perspective. Now, here we are in Agile, where we're talking about cross-functional teams, and we are talking about autonomy. Okay, so
Mhm.
do you see any parallel between an independent testing team and an autonomous team, or it's a different perspective altogether? I mean, how do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I guess it depends what function the independent testing team uh, is providing. So my role within my current company is I'm in support role, right? So I support teams to be independent. Whereas if you have reliance on an independent team, then again, that's where we have two separate functions that operate two different skill sets. And
Mhm.
so the autonomy is then gone. So yeah, if the independent team is providing a support function, such as enabling teams to create their automation framework or offering pairing opportunities so that you can learn about the testing mindset. I think that's where it can assist. But yeah, there's lots of ways to do it, right? There's lots of ways to interact with independent teams. But
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely. I like that perspective, and something that comes to my mind immediately is the concept of a test center of excellence, which was prevalent in the day and age of independent teams. With the advent of Agile and DevOps, it sort of went away. But now we are seeing the COE coming back.
mm-hmm.
So I think it's a lot to do with what you just mentioned about
Yeah.
autonomy. That within the team also you're trying to look at. So would you agree with that perspective, or how do you look at that?
Yeah, I agree. In my context, the leaders of the technology, like the CTO and director of engineering, they want to operate on a small scale of development teams, right?
Hmm.
So the more opportunities that they have to scale down teams and spin up more output, they will do that, right? So I
Yes.
think, as you say, like having the testing center of excellence will allow you to have a smaller function which operates across more teams, and developers should be testing, right? So testing is the whole
Yes.
team responsibility. So developers should be testing, and that's what my boss always says, right? Like, why aren't the developers testing? But it's a much more complex problem than that, and so often you do need embedded members
Hmm.
to start with, and then you can move into a more mature function which maybe doesn't rely heavily on having a primary tester on every team. But yeah, it's a long discussion that we could talk about for a long time.
No, but I like that perspective, and I like what is happening, because I think that's where your perspective of autonomy is also coming from.
Mm-hmm.
Because with when you are talking about smaller teams, where you are focusing on the outcome, and you are enabling them with things that they need to do to achieve their goals, or you're enabling them with whatever that they need as a team to succeed, I think you are giving them the necessary autonomy that you're talking about. So
Mm-hmm.
I quite like what you've been saying. Now I have a challenge there. Okay, and the challenge there is getting the right people,
Mm-hmm.
okay, who to work in those autonomous teams, uphold the value of autonomy, as well as embed themselves in an agile team and say, okay, although we want to operate autonomously, but we are still a part of the team. We are not, individual contributors, or want to function independently.
Yeah.
So I know that you've been doing a lot of work in recruitment as well. So
Mm-hmm.
how do you look for people who have this mindset which fits into your context?
Yeah, it's a really good point that you're saying about finding the right people, because for me, it's not about the skills they have, right? It's, well, maybe it does fall under skills, but it's about someone having the kind of empathy for others,
Hmm.
having trust in the team, and being open. So if someone has those facets, then they can slot into a team and they will adapt to the needs of the team. And also, they will be upfront and honest about what they don't know, and also will be open to pair with a tester and say, look, you drive this, and I'll just watch and learn. And I think that's the kind of most important thing that we're kind of trying to find. And from a testing perspective, you need to find someone that will be an ambassador for testing and will constantly ask questions about, how are we going to test this? Is this testable? What refactoring do we need to do to make this feature testable in the future? And so that kind of mentality of a tester is slightly different to someone who's going to come in and do the technical aspects. So it's very difficult to firstly recruit, right? You've got to ask questions about their technical ability because they need to be able to read and write code alongside developers, but also they need to stand up for themselves and stand up for what they want to do. So it's very difficult, but yeah, I think I care more about the concepts of openness and putting trust in your team than I care about the kind of technical aspects, if you like.
I think that's a very good approach, and I like the fact that you mentioned about being an ambassador of testing. Now, I would like to learn from you because you've been, working in, I think, mostly the UK region where you hire.
Yeah.
So I want to understand because I've seen, some things happening in different geographies around the world, and I want to get your perspective on that. Just to give you an example, if I talk to some hiring managers in India, they would normally tell me that, I've interviewed 100 candidates, and I have found, so many of them to be very good with their technical skills and coding skills, but hardly any one of them can actually test.
Yeah.
Have you had some sort of a similar experience, or has it been any different?
Very similar, yeah, very similar experience. Also, I think it's difficult in the age that we live in where people have a CV and it has all of the tools on it, and so they're centered around the tools rather than what the tools deliver. So that aspect is difficult, and people also can approach problems that they've seen before. So something, but it's the problem solving side of things, which people find very difficult. I don't know as well whether it's to do with the interview process. So they come to the interview, they're very nervous, they have, they stutter on some problem solving activities. I don't know whether that's just in the context, right? In the day to day, they may be able to do the challenge perfectly fine in their own time and in their own setting. But but as you say about finding the testing side of things, that is very difficult to find. And what I say is, I can teach you the technical aspects, but what I can't teach you is how to come with your kind of mentality of things and your cultural side of things. I can't teach you that. So yeah, well, I can, but it would take a long time and it'd be a lot of hours. So yeah, it's definitely an experience that I've had as well in the UK.
Okay, so seeing similar patterns, how, what do you think is actually responsible for this trend? Is it more to do with the kind of conversations that people have, that automation is going to solve this problem and we should be 100% automated, and so we need these tools to solve our problem? And also the fact that we see that there is a big variance in the pay scale of automation testers versus testers who don't generally use tools. Do you think all of those are factors, or do you see something else as well?
It's a good question. I'm not really sure where it comes from. I think there's different ways that you could look at it potentially. People coming from development backgrounds going into automation, coming from computer science into automation, which then they don't have that foundation. I definitely think the pay scale of automation is definitely a problem that we potentially need to solve. And I think automation is different to testing. in a lot of ways, because
Yes.
it's that checking versus testing. So
Yeah.
the skill set is slightly different. And that's where, as I say, like what I'm trying to hire for, right, is someone who has both of those things, and that can be very difficult. Also, you have to have someone who wants to go from automation to a, a senior role in testing, whereas lots of people that I manage are using automation, right, as a stepping stone to maybe a more development centered role. So yeah, I guess it comes down to the ambitions of that person as well.
Well, in speaking to other colleagues and other testers from different regions, what I have learned is that there is some sort of a mindset
Mhm.
in especially people who are in the final stages of their college and they want to get into the professional setup. There is a mindset that prevails that developers make and
Yeah,
testers break. So
yeah,
everybody wants to make and they don't want to break. Well, and
hmm
I try to convince people and I try to tell them the testers don't break anything. They only
yeah,
point out what's broken. It's already
yeah,
broken, right? So, but then, of course, this has been prevailing for several generations now, and it's a difficult conversation to get into and convince people that no, this is not the way. It'll probably take one or two generations to get people convinced. And so on the same lines, I mean, you spoken about the psychological aspect, you've spoken about mindset and things like that. So what do you think can be changed as a message to the community to start thinking more about testing being a more, if I may say, a more noble profession compared to development?
yeah. I think it goes to what you were saying about testers don't break things, right? I think the role of the tester and the role of the tester that I really enjoyed when I was doing testing and not so much managing was working in a cross-functional team, and I would pick up any ticket, right? A development ticket, a DevOps ticket, a testing ticket. I would pick it up, and then you pair with someone, right? So I'm open with my team. I don't have these front end skills. I can do the logic, but the CSS I have no idea how to do. So you pair with a front end who's good at that, and then you work on it together. I think that's so much more powerful to have two minds looking at it. And also, we had a policy that if you go through pairing, then you don't have to get two reviews on the code review. You only need one. And then they're just looking at syntax errors and things like that rather than looking at, okay, no one, not a tester has looked at this, so I need to consider the testing. So two minds is always more powerful than one. And the testing concept is becoming so much more important now when we look at the amount of hacks that happen nowadays on applications, the security aspects, the performance of applications in the attention span of users is so low. Your application has to be far more performant than it used to be, and functional wise, right? If your application doesn't work, then the user's going to drop off straight away. There's loads of other competitors who are doing the same thing as you, who will have a functioning application. So testing is so important now that it 100% needs to be developed into the mindset of every company. Um, and yeah, and especially around the kind of investment situation now with tighter belts because of raising costs, and so if you don't have a quality application, then why are you going to get investment? So yeah,
Right.
I think it's definitely a really important aspect of development.
Absolutely, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more on this. I have had similar experiences, so it's great that you also think on similar lines.
Yeah,
Hopefully, we will be able to make a difference and change the world someday.
yeah,
That's the hope. That's the hope that we all testers live with. Now, I want to
yeah.
talk about your experiences a little more with testing, with the various kinds of products that you've been testing. And I see that you've worked on very different kind of applications through your journey so
Mhm.
far. But I also see that you've spent considerable amount of time on healthcare applications.
Yeah.
So very curious to know if you have any experience dealing with safety critical applications of products where it's like one error and it may cause
Mhm.
somebody to die. Have you been in that kind of a situation?
Yeah, absolutely. So working, I won't call out the company, but working in this context, data is just so critical, and
Yes.
keeping people's personal data safe. So working in these environments, especially working with complex applications which require caching, which require some kind of in the browser help to enable the performance that I was talking about, causes some kind of data discrepancy sometimes where data can potentially be not what it should be. And so, yeah, we've had these situations before where potentially one patient's data gets merged with another's. And obviously, this is a very serious incident where
Yes.
a medical professional could potentially make a wrong decision based on the data that they were presented with. So, yeah, I've had incidents like that, incidents with um, also data loss potentially through, again, similar situations where your server goes down. There's a period in time where it's switching over in the load balancing, and that data doesn't go anywhere. It just gets lost in the ether. So I've also had those kind of situations. So yeah, it's very serious, and these are the kind of non-functional things, right, that you need to consider, and also you need to test in scenarios which of failure, right? You always need to be thinking about those failure scenarios. Is the data safe? Is the data going to be recovered in these situations? And they're the kind of things that working in the medical profession, you have to make sure that you are keeping your patients safe at the end of the day. And that's priority number one, beyond, okay, it's an easy to use application, it's a performant application. Safety is the primary, and we used to call it our North Star. Patient safety is our North Star. And so whenever you're thinking about anything, you'll always look up and you're like, okay, that's our North Star. Does this fit with that criteria? So yeah, they're my kind of experiences that call out to me every time someone mentions as well working in this profession.
Well, hearing from you, I can also relate to some of those aspects, and I think you will also agree that two very important pieces of the entire puzzle there is your testability, number one, because that's one big piece, and sadly enough, it is not spoken about that often,
Mm-hmm.
in day-to-day conversations. And the other piece that I look at as being very critical is your test data. Now,
Mm-hmm.
you need, because you are testing such applications where your patient data is so important. So when you are testing, you would need data which is quite close to the patient data, if not exactly the same, which is very risky, of course, using the exact same data. But then, so that brings me to my next question. How have you dealt with the challenges on testability and with test data?
Yeah, I'll come on to the test data one first because I think it falls nicely with the previous examples. Is we had a copy of the production, but obviously with anonymized data, so we can replicate these issues, and we can also use the scale of the data that we had, because you get into situations where you have some patients which have hundreds of records, right, which are potentially difficult to replicate in a test environment. So we'd have that copy, and we could run performance tests against it. We can run a functional test against it, and so that would allow us to have that kind of confidence going forwards. But it's very important that you make sure that you sanitize all of your data and you keep it in a safe place, and you don't you update it as well. Make sure that you're constantly refreshing it. Then with the testability side of things, absolutely, it's about having that conversation before you build the feature, and also coming up with strategies to enable us to do that. And feature flags are your friends in this scenario, toggling it on and off, and also having test flags in there, which allow you to kind of means that data doesn't go downstream, so you can make sure that you're cleaning that data as you go through. So they're the kind of strategies that we've used in the past to enable us to have access to potentially that feature in an environment which has all the data that we need without having to worry about it going wrong. So the testability conversation is a difficult one because it will slow down development. It will make it harder to develop. But as I said, I've been very lucky in working in cross-functional teams with open individuals who are willing to have that conversation. And it makes it easier when you're there at that point where you're like, oh, okay, how are we going to test this through the system? Okay, we'll just add a flag in here, and we'll add some tests around it, which makes it much easier.
Interesting. I see that there is a guest around
Yes.
right behind you, which is nice.
My dog always makes an appearance. It's keeping guard.
Nice. It's checking on you if you're answering the questions properly or not. But anyways, okay. So before I go on to my next serious question, I wanted to bring in the fun element of TesterSpeak. And there's something that I started doing in season 2, and I want to continue that in season 3 as well. And what I call is a rapid fire, where I ask you a few questions and you have less than 5 seconds to think about the answer. And if it is a multiple choice question, then you have to support your answer with the right reason for that. So my first question to you is, now that travels have opened up and you have the opportunity to travel, what's the one destination that you've never been to so far and you would like to go?
New Zealand is on my bucket list. I'm a big rugby fan, so I'd love to see the All Blacks down in New Zealand. And we were meant to go there when my daughter was young, so I could work from New Zealand and we could have a month out there. But obviously, due to COVID, that never happened. So I still want to make that happen at some point.
That's nice. Well, I've watched a little bit of rugby and I like the All Blacks as well. I mean, you hear about them, you see them on screen, and suddenly there is an adrenaline rush in you. You want to do something like the way they play. Interesting.
Definitely.
The next question that I have in my mind is, so if there is a chance for you to have a dinner with your favorite celebrity, what is the one question that you have in mind that you are going to ask him or her?
It's a great question. So on the rugby theme, Johnny Wilkinson is
Oh,
the
wow.
man that I would have at dinner. Uh, yeah, I watched him as a kid, and he's a huge inspiration to me. And
Um,
I would ask him what was going through his mind when he had the ball in his hands and kicked the winning drop goal at the 2003 World Cup. Because yeah, we were all waiting with anticipation when he had that ball, and yeah, so I'd ask him that.
Interesting, interesting. I really like, how you've taken inspiration from Johnny. He's,
Mm,
of course, those who watch the sport would know who Johnny Wilkinson is. And, I watched a little bit. So I'm also a huge fan, but not as big as, somebody playing cricket or something like that. Because,
yeah, yeah,
I've grown up in India and cricket has been the sport there. Now of course they're picking up on other sports as well. So
mm,
anyways, very interesting responses. Now getting back with the theme of testing,
mhm,
well, one area where I see you've done a considerable amount of work, and that is of course to keep up with changing times where applications have evolved from being a monolith to microservices,
yeah,
and going with the theme of keeping focus on your test data and using it in a judicious way. I
mm,
see you doing a lot of contract testing.
yeah.
Yeah. So would you like to share with us your thoughts on contract testing and why is it important when we are talking about testing microservices?
Yeah, it's exactly around that, like microservices, messaging, all that kind of um, where you're breaking up that data into smaller chunks. Um, when you're moving from that traditional API testing approach of we have an endpoint, we'll check the responses. Now with contract testing, you can pinpoint those specific services and endpoints and relationships and expand out that coverage that you have. And the beauty of contract testing is you're using mock servers, you're using your local servers, so there's no reliance on environments, and that's where the huge benefits come in. But going back to the psychology, going back to agile teams, communication is the biggest win I see from contract testing because you're connecting the consumer, the web app or the mobile app, and you're connecting the backend services, and you can talk in the same language. And also, it allows you to have that conversation earlier. So testability is built into the concept of it. So for me, that's where having those conversations about this is how I'm going to interact with you. This is what we need to think about before you even start building or during the building process. That's where the true benefits come in for me. So, yes, contract testing is definitely something which applies in the microservices world because of those smaller chunks and having a tool to enable you to test those things, but also, yeah, the ability to open up conversations, which you should all be having, and everyone, best intentions, does want to have. But as I mentioned about getting into your team, being in working independently, those conversations don't happen. So yeah, it's a tool for communication as much as it is a tool for testing microservices.
I think that is an excellent response. How you've tied everything so far with that aspect. I really love that. Now, something, with my little knowledge in contract testing, I've worked with a tool called PACT, of course, which
Yes,
allows me to do bidirectional contract testing.
yes,
Now, talking a little bit about tools, we've kept tools out of our conversation so far.
Uh-huh.
But what difference do you see a tool like Pact making in our quest for achieving our goals when it comes to contract testing?
Yeah, so Packflow's new bidirectional feature
Mhm.
enables you to use your open API specs and build contracts from those. And I think that's a really important step uh, for contract testing because of the way that we build software and the way that startups build software, especially in my context anyway, because we're building a minimum viable product. We're not building all the infrastructure around it straight away. So we have a lot of specifications. We have a lot of APIs already that we can then utilize with bidirectional because we can then generate our contracts from the existing APIs. And it still offers you those benefits around visualizing your APIs, visualizing who's using your APIs, understanding versioning of your APIs, and being able to move in a continuous manner towards releasing frequently by understanding, okay, I've made this change, will this break any contracts? So still offers you a lot of the benefits of the tool without having to rebuild all of your tests from the ground up. So bidirectional is a really great step and something which Packflow team has done amazingly to invent this concept.
Yes. And also, keeping in mind the various engineering principles that we have, it has enabled us testers to sort of have a bigger playground, if you will, to experiment a lot more with your data, with situations, with risks that you foresee. And
Mhm.
I think that's one very good aspect that bidirectional contract testing brings in. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, that's the beauty, right, of unlocking everything and having you're testing the contract, you're not testing the application as a whole. And
Yeah.
so you don't have to worry about taking down the environment. You don't have to worry about, okay, we need to turn on this flag so it doesn't it responds with this method or whatever. That's the beauty of it, and utilizing the tools and the frameworks that we're already using, which means that you're not having to learn something new. You're not having to rebuild things that already exist. It makes for um, a great tool. Sorry, my dog's getting involved again.
That's fine. That's fine. It's just trying to keep a check on you, maybe.
Just give me 1 sec. I just need to
Sure,
let him out. 1 sec.
sure.
Sorry, my wife needed something from the office as well.
That's not a problem. So, that's the beauty of it. We are all working from home,
Yeah, exactly.
and that is life. Okay. So I will see if I want to include this bit as well. So to show the human aspect of it, and to
Exactly, yeah.
show and to show that we are all humans, we will have day-to-day challenges, and we are all coping up really well. And talking about challenges, I want to understand from you, in your career, what have been the top three challenges that you have faced so far? and how have you overcome those?
Wow, top three challenges. It's a really great question. So my first challenge, I guess, if you can call it a challenge, is I got into a management position very early, and I decided to step back and go and do more technical and work in, yeah, work more in a cross-functional team. So yeah, I guess the challenge for me there was what what do I care about, right? What do I want from my career, and what direction do I want to take? So that was a huge challenge for me. My second challenge, working in testing for sure, is a huge challenge every day around. Do you want to be that person that's constantly banging on the door of we need more time for testing and testing is important? So yeah, I have that battle quite frequently of do I want to be doing this all the time? Of yeah, the same old conversations. But yeah, we power on, and yeah, we learn something new every time. So yeah, that's definitely another challenge that I have. And then another challenge that I've had in testing is the languages, so the programming languages, and yeah, because we're not pinned to a specific language, then it can become quite tricky. I now can program in four of the languages confidently, a couple of languages not so confidently. Um, but that's another thing, right? Is that where do you focus your time, and where do you focus your learning? So I guess yeah, the learning aspect is the key part of that. Of I don't really mind being a tester who is a jack of all trades and a master of none, but sometimes you do question yourself about whether you should be mastering something. So yeah, that's definitely another challenge that I face in my career.
Well, if I heard you correctly, you said you can program in four languages confidently and a couple of
Hmm.
them not so confidently,
Yeah,
which makes you a polyglot,
yeah,
right? Somebody who knows more than five languages, of course.
hmm,
I know, of course, you know, the entire world knows about Marit. And
hmm,
Marit says that she's a polyglot. Of course, she knows so many languages.
hmm.
So it's nice to meet another one. I have never tried. I have never tried counting. I will never try counting because I would be embarrassing myself. So, so let's keep that discussion aside. But it's really nice, and you made a very good point that we are not pinned to a certain technology or a certain language,
Yeah.
and adding that diversity in our skill set makes us stronger, makes us
Mm,
more collaborative. We can talk in the same language as developers. We
mhm,
can talk in the same language as architects. They can explain the concepts better to us. We can share our thoughts and views. So I think that is excellent, Lewis. And I feel inspired after talking to you. Well, very seriously, because what you said is absolutely right. That if you really want to go and you know understand what you are actually trying to do, get the sense of testing, get that mindset, get that psychology, and I like your first response, the first challenge that you mentioned, that you got into a managerial position early and you decided to take a step back and look at things in perspective and then take the next step. Um,
mhm,
a lot of us, probably including me, would be delighted if we were in that situation and say,
mhm,
okay, bring it on. But you chose to do it a little differently, which
mhm,
is very encouraging. And I'm sure a lot of testers would think about it because it's not always about the position as such. It's
Yep.
about you and how much how well prepared you are for that, and what else do you want to do? What are your ambitions, aspirations? So it's
Yep.
got a lot to do with that as well.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's important to, like, I now in my career I'm so much better off for doing that, and it's so hard to have that insight right at that time. But I think when you're in a position which you're not comfortable with, like you're anxious because you don't feel confident in the decisions that you're making, they're the kind of signs that you can look for and say, okay, is it worth taking a step back? And I was still young at the time, right? So I had lots of time on my side. But yeah, I think we're living longer now. There's still time to make changes in your career.
I think that is an excellent perspective, Lewis. I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I came into this conversation thinking, okay, I will get some ideas about contract testing, about the kind of work that you have been doing, but I have learned much more than that. And I'm sure that everybody who watches this interview will learn a lot about implementing the things that you have. And this whole interview goes in line with something that I've always followed in my life. The one saying that I always followed in my life is, it's not about what you have, it's about what you make of what you have. And you've indeed shown us the way of doing that. So you had certain skills, you made the best out of it, and in situations you took a step back, you looked at it, then you experimented with it a little more, you learned more, you upskilled yourself, gained more knowledge, and then went on with the next step. And this whole interview was a very rich learning experience for me. Thank you, Lewis, for being on the show. Thank you for being the first guest of season 3. It was a wonderful experience, Lewis, talking to you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm obviously in a very privileged position being a white male, but hopefully I can share my knowledge and other people can find inspiration from that.
Well, I wouldn't go on that direction at all. It doesn't make a difference. What makes a difference is the way you think. What makes the difference is how much impact you're able to bring in with your messages. And I think you're doing a great job, spreading your knowledge by participating in various conferences, meetups, doing these podcasts with other people. Okay, I learned a lot about you from by watching your earlier podcasts and reading some of the stuff that you've written. But this was, like I said, a very rich experience for me, learning from you firsthand. So thank you once again for being a guest on TesterSpeak. We look forward to talking to you again because I've been talking about this for a long time, but probably once this season ends, I will come with a chapter 2 of TesterSpeak where I will invite my guests from all seasons again because some of these conversations are unfinished. So would like to continue with them, keep the learning going on. Thank you so much, Lewis.
So that's great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Lewis. Well, my friends, this is a wrap on this episode. I hope you liked it. I had a great experience recording it. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to reach out to me. If you have any suggestions for future guests, don't hesitate to reach out to me. If you think you could be my next guest, also, please feel free to reach out to me. So, like, share, and subscribe to the channel for new episodes. Thank you so much. Bye. Cheers.